we have been progressing through the valleys of Baha'u'llah's seven valleys. We have traversed the valleys of search, of love, of knowledge, of unity, and we're now going to move into the valleys of contentment and wonderment today. As Baha'u'llah said, though, the valley of unity is not a single valley, but really the stage of unity characterizes everything that follows. And so you can think of the seven valleys as divided broadly into the first three as stages of limitation, and the last four as stages of unity. And we talked about some of the characteristics of the valley of unity in our last session. And I wanted to begin by addressing what may seem like, I don't know, the illogicality, or even the on the face of it, the nonsense of it all, saying, well, it's all one, when clearly that's not how the world is constructed. Clearly there's a difference between you and me, and between people, and between us and whatever we take to be ultimate reality, and the other objects in the world. And so I wanted to suggest a way of looking at the question of deeper unity that might spark our thinking in a particular direction. So our intuition that we're different from each other comes from the fact that we occupy physical bodies made of atoms that are clearly distinguishable from each other. If it stops there, if our identities end with just our physical bodies, these aggregates of atoms, and if our thoughts and consciousness are just electrical signals passing along neurons in our brains, then naturally one consciousness, one person would be completely and cleanly distinguishable from another. And then to talk of deeper unity or to talk of sameness between people would be then at best only because our brains function in similar ways, and there are certain ways and patterns of thought that we have in common. This is as far as unity goes when one interprets our realities in a purely physical way, when one draws an analogy between one person and another. But if instead we think of consciousness like Abdu'l-Baha talks about the human spirit in Some Answered Questions, it's more like a light that becomes visible in a polished mirror when the conditions are right. When it reaches the degree of purity, then light can shine and images can be reflected in it. Then you can think of the same light appearing in numerous mirrors. From this view of consciousness, we can talk about the distinction between one person, between one soul and another soul, ultimately disappearing, because what unites us is the fact that ultimately the light shining within our souls, which is ultimately the light of consciousness, is that same light. And whereas bodies have a tendency to be separable from each other, rays of light don't have that same tendency. Rays of light don't tend to stay in association with, in a particular physical configuration. They spread out into the universe and distinguishable one from another. So from that perspective, the we is not our bodies, but that light of consciousness that illuminates our body. As a famous but diminutive philosopher once said, "Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter." So it's from this perspective that we can begin to understand the Valley of Unity. The Conference of the Birds by Attar, which the Seven Valleys is roughly modeled after, has a number of passages and stories and examples that I think help illuminate points that Baha'u'llah is making in the Seven Valleys. And in the Valley of Unity, in Conference of the Birds, we find some of the lines reading the following. This various world is like a toy, a colored palm tree given to a boy, but made of wax. Now knead it in your fist, and there's the wax of which its shapes consist. The lovely forms and colors are undone, and what seemed many things is only one. All things are one. There isn't any two. It isn't me who speaks. It isn't you. So this stage of unity, though, as Baha'u'llah says, is comprised of different, let's say, different substages. It's as though there's initial understanding of unity. There's a sort of, it's all one. That's nice. Say what? Oh. That's kind of a way of summarizing the last four valleys. So it's like, okay, it's all one, and that's great. There's an initial sort of, that resolves everything. The tensions are resolved. Everything is, you're sort of comfortable, but then it hits you what the implications of it are. And you're thrust into the state of, what? The wonderment, the confusion, the bewilderment. And then past that stage is the further, that's what it is. I get it. So that's the preview of what of the stages we'll be talking about. So beginning with the city of contentment, which is the next stage of unity.
Do you have a page?
This is on page 39, paragraph 61. Baha'u'llah, and this is the shortest of the valleys. It's actually skipped in Gems of Divine Mysteries. Baha'u'llah doesn't even address it. And in Conference of the Birds, it comes at a different position. In Conference of the Birds, the Valley of Contentment comes prior to the Valley of Unity instead of after. And it makes sense to me in the sense that logically this station of contentment could come after the Valley of Knowledge as well, because the Valley of Knowledge also entails a kind of resolution of attention. One is able to see the end in the beginning, and so one can imagine that also producing a sort of spiritual state of contentment, just as one can imagine the same thing happening following the Valley of Unity. This word for contentment in the Valley of Contentment, esterna, means contentment. It also means detachment. And in Conference of the Birds, sometimes it's translated as the Valley of Detachment. You might think it's a totally different valley, but detachment, and in the sense of independence, in the sense of self-sufficiency, is really what is meant by contentment. And it's interesting also that the word esterna for contentment is based on the triliteral root, which is the same root for the word wealth. So being rich is also being free from want. It's being not dependent on anyone else. It's being independent, which is also the idea of contentment is very much tied in with the idea of being wealthy, which is why sometimes you see this imagery being used as well. So here's the shortest of the valleys, and maybe we can read through it and then say a few words about it, and then move on. Baha'u'llah writes, "The wayfarer, after traversing the high plains of the supernal journey, entereth into the city of contentment. In this valley he feeleth the breezes of divine contentment blowing from the plain of the spirit. He burneth away the veils of want, and with inward and outward eye perceiveth within and without all things the day of God will satisfy everyone out of his abundance. From sorrow he turneth to bliss, and from grief to joy, and from anguish and dejection to delight and rapture. Although to outward seeming the wayfarers in this valley may dwell upon the dust, yet inwardly they are throned in the heights of mystic meaning. They partake of the eternal bounties of heaven and drink of the delicate wines of the Spirit. The tongue faileth in describing these three valleys, and speech falleth short. The pen steppeth not into this arena, the ink leaveth only a blot. In these stations the nightingale of the heart hath other songs and secrets, which make the heart to leap and the soul to cry out. But this mystery of inner meaning may be whispered only from heart to heart and confided only from breast to breast. The bliss of mystic knowers can be only told from heart to heart, a bliss no messenger can bear and no missive dare impart. How many are the matters I have out of weakness left unsaid, for my words would fail to reckon them, and mine every effort would fall short. O friend, till thou enter the garden of these inner meanings, thou shalt never taste of the imperishable wine of this valley. And shouldst thou taste of it, thou wilt turn away from all else and drink the cup of contentment. Thou wilt loose thyself from all things and bind thyself unto him, and lay down thy life in his path, and offer up thy soul for his sake. And this, even though in this realm there is no all else that thou needest forget. God was alone, there was none else besides him. For on this plane the traveler witnesseth the beauty of the friend in all things. In fire he seeth the face of the beloved, in illusion he beholdeth the secret of reality. In the attributes he readeth the riddle of the essence. For he hath burnt away all veils with a sigh, and cast aside all coverings with a glance. With piercing sight he gazeth upon the new creation, and with lucid heart he graspeth subtle verities. The words, "And we have made thy sight sharp in this day," are a sufficient proof of this assertion, and a befitting description of this state. So, a couple of characteristics of this state is the idea of abundance, of being self-sufficient. Baha'u'llah, however, points out in this and the following valleys that the words are incapable of explaining the reality behind it. There's an experiential component that can only be communicated from heart to heart. There's almost, as he says, a secret, something which either cannot or should not be spoken. And we'll come back to this idea of the secret that Baha'u'llah is alluding to after we look at the Valley of Wonderment. This paragraph, I think, makes a point which is very much in line with the theme of the Valley of Unity about all else. Baha'u'llah says that shouldst thou taste of it, thou wilt turn away from all else and drink the cup of contentment. And then he comes back and says, but there really is no all else in this realm. So there's a way in which one can understand this valley as being detached and self-sufficient from everything else. But since you're past the Valley of Unity, there is no all else to be sufficient from, because one has reached the point in which there is no this and that. One has reached the point in which the differences between souls, between one's own soul and the divine reality becomes, which is why I think Baha'u'llah here quotes, God was alone, there was none else besides him. In this state, there is nothing but God. In this state, when we become aware of our true inner reality, which is that essence of the light which God has placed within us, we realize that there's no distinction between us and God in that sense. So the state then is characterized by a sense of contentment and satisfaction, but it naturally produces the valley that follows. The logical next stage is when you get to the stage of contentment, and you start thinking about what it is on which that contentment is based. You start questioning who and what you are. Well, if my soul is really a fragment of the divine, and if that's the case with everyone's soul, if the reality of the human spirit is that it's a light reflected in a mirror rather than a property of the atoms comprising my body, if my true reality is more like that the body is a channel for the passage of something else, then it leads us to start asking the question. It begs the question, well, if I'm not separate from my neighbor, if I'm not separate from God, then what am I? And what's left of my soul? And this is where we reach the Valley of Wonderment. And this is paragraph 65. And the word here for wonderment, heirat, is also the word for, it could also just as easily have been translated as bewilderment, or perhaps even confusion. So it's not so much wonderment like awe of seeing something beautiful and being lost in wonder. It's the wonderment of almost being dazed and confused, because one is now face to face with a very challenging reality, which is that the world that we thought was so concrete, thank you, and so logically constructed is no longer so. Baha'u'llah writes, after journeying through the plains of pure contentment, the traveler cometh to the valley of wonderment, and is tossed upon the oceans of grandeur, and at every moment his wonder increaseth. Now he seeth the embodiment of wealth as poverty itself, and the essence of independence as sheer impotence. And here the word for wealth, ghana, is related to the istighna of the previous valley. And this independence is precisely istighna, and could have been translated as contentment. So the valley of contentment is negated upon passing into this next valley. It's the nice, say what? It's the kind of doing a double take. Now he is struck dumb with the beauty of the all-glorious. Again he is wearied out with his own life. How many a mystic tree hath this whirlwind of bewilderment, this is heirat, snatched by the roots? How many a soul hath it worn out and exhausted? For in this valley the traveler is flung into confusion, albeit in the eyes of him who hath attained, such signs are esteemed and well beloved. At every moment he beholdeth a wondrous world and a new creation, and goeth from astonishment to astonishment. This is the word heirat again. Wonderment to wonderment, and is lost in awe before the new handiwork of him who is the sovereign Lord of all. So the word for wonderment is translated at least in three different ways in this valley, as wonderment, as bewilderment, as astonishment. And then Baha'u'llah spends most of this valley talking about the state of sleep. Or it's been translated, the word is sleep, nom, but it's been translated as the dream. So he's talking about this phenomenon of sleep and what happens when we're sleeping. And it might seem like a bit of a departure until we really think about what is fascinating and bewildering, even confusing, about the nature of the dream state. And let's read, first of all, what Baha'u'llah has to say, and then maybe make some comments on how this connects to this valley of wonderment. Baha'u'llah says, indeed, O brother, if we ponder each created thing, we shall witness a myriad consummate wisdoms and learn a myriad new and wondrous truths. One of the created phenomena is the dream. Behold how many secrets have been deposited therein, how many wisdoms treasured up, how many worlds concealed. Observe how thou art asleep in a dwelling, and its doors are shut. On a sudden thou findest thyself in a far-off city, which thou enterest without moving thy feet, or wearying thy body. Without taxing thine eyes thou seest, without troubling thine ears thou hearest, without a tongue thou speakest. And perchance, when 10 years have passed, thou wilt witness in this temporal world the very things thou hast dreamt tonight. Now there are many wisdoms to ponder in the dream, which none but the people of this valley can comprehend in their reality. First, what is this world, where without eye, or ear, or hand, or tongue, one can put all these to use? Second, how is it that in the outer world thou seest today the effect of a dream which thou didst witness in the world of sleep some 10 years past? Consider the difference between these two worlds, and the mysteries they conceal, that attended by divine confirmations thou mayest attain unto heavenly discoveries and enter the realms of holiness. God, the Most High, hath placed these signs in men so that veiled minds might not deny the mysteries of the life beyond, nor belittle that which hath been promised them. In the original, the veiled mind was translated as philosophers, which it doesn't say philosophers at all in the original, so I'm not sure how it ended up being sort of a bit of editorial commentary, yes, by the translator. For some hold fast to reason and deny whatever reason comprehendeth not, and yet feeble minds can never grasp the reality of the stages that we have related. The universal divine intellect alone can comprehend them. How can feeble reason embrace the Quran or the spider snare a phoenix in its web? All these states are to be found and witnessed in the valley of wonderment, wherein the wayfarer at every moment seeketh for more and is not wearied. Thus the Lord of the first and the last, in setting forth the grades of contemplation and expressing bewilderment, hath said, increase my wonder and amazement at thee, O God. And this is tahayyaran. So this amazement is also it's the same word as wonderment. And actually, the word tahayyaran has been translated as wonder and amazement here. Likewise, reflect upon the perfection of man's creation, that all these planes and states are folded up and hidden away within him. Dost thou deem thyself a small and puny form when thou foldest within thyself the greater world? And there's a play here between ourselves as the alame asghar, as the microcosm, and the greater world, the alame akbar, or the macrocosm. The idea that there's a mirror relationship between the inner horizons of the human reality and the outer horizons of the cosmos is one of the oldest ideas in mystical philosophy and in the religions of the world. And one can think of this almost as a Platonic, that there's an archetype. Our souls, in a way, are archetypes or patterns that represent, and those patterns are repeated at different levels throughout the universe. And the reason why they're repeated patterns has something to do deeply with the structure of things. We must therefore labor to destroy the animal condition till the meaning of humanity cometh to light. And he comes on and says a bit more about the dream. He says, likewise Luqman, who had drunk from the wellspring of wisdom and tasted of the waters of mercy, and proving to his son Nathan the plains of resurrection and death, advanced the dream as evidence and example. We related here that through this evanescent servant, a memory may endure of that youth of the school of divine unity, that elder of the realms of instruction and detachment. He said, O son, if thou art able not to sleep, then thou art able not to die. And if thou art able not to waken after sleep, then thou shalt be able not to rise after death. O friend, the heart is the dwelling place of eternal mysteries. Make it not the home of fleeting fancies. Waste not the treasure of thy precious life occupied with this swiftly passing world. Thou comest from the world of holiness. Bind not thine heart to the earth. Thou art a dweller in the court of reunion. Choose not the homeland of the dust. In sum, there is no end to the description of these stages. But because of the wrongs inflicted by the peoples of this age, this servant is disinclined to continue. The tale remaineth yet unfinished and untold. Forgive me then, for weariness hath taken hold. The pen groaneth, and the ink sheddeth tears, and the river of the heart surgeth in waves of blood. Nothing can befall us but what God hath destined for us. Peace be upon him who followeth the way of guidance. So perhaps Baha'u'llah here is referring to his own sufferings and foreshadowing the sufferings that were to come.
And it used to say, peace be upon him that followeth the straight path. Now it's the path, the way of guidance.
It may actually be the same phrase in the original here.
But it does say something like, I'm too tired to do this anymore, or something like that.
Yeah.
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 He's not gonna go on.
Yeah. So why spend so much time talking about the dream? So Baha'u'llah gives us two reasons, and it's connected with this idea of the valley of wonderment or confusion, bewilderment, of becoming unhinged, of feeling like we were solidly moored to reality, and then the moorings are broken free, and we realize that our view of what we thought was real has turned upside down, and the dream helps us do that. Baha'u'llah this isn't the only place that Baha'u'llah talks about the significance of the dream world. There's also a passage in Gleanings where he says similar. This is in Gleanings section 79. He says, "Consider thy state when asleep. Verily I say, this phenomenon is the most mysterious of the signs of God amongst men, were they to ponder it in their hearts. The world in which thou livest is different and apart from that which thou hast experienced in thy dream. The latter world hath neither beginning nor end. It would be true if thou wert to contend that this same world is, as decreed by the all-glorious and almighty God, within thy proper self and is wrapped up within thee. It would be equally true to maintain that thy spirit, having transcended the limitations of sleep and having stripped itself of all earthly attachment, hath by the act realm which lieth hidden in the innermost reality of this world." So how does the dream help to unmoor us from reality and help to thrust us into this state of bewilderment? To the extent that we see, that, as Abdu'l-Baha says in Paris Talks, the reality of man is his thought. To the extent that we see our reality as what we experience as opposed to the physical constitution of our bodies. If our reality is what we think and what we experience, then this dream world presents us with a kind of reality which is very different from the waking world. And it's different in very significant ways. Baha'u'llah points out two of them in the Valley of Wonderment. One of them is that it's independent of the body. So when you're asleep, your eyes are closed. You're not moving your limbs. You're not using your eyes and ears, but you yet have those experiences just as though you were using them. The second is that the strange fact that many have experienced, that dreams can often be premonitions, and they can often come true in very strange and inexplicable ways. A couple of other features of dreams which I think are pertinent here, which probably all of us have experienced at one point or another. One of them is that our identity is fluid in dreams. One can dream of being another person, and people, friends, spouses, acquaintances, they can take on different identities in dreams. So it's almost as though there's an interchangeability that is definitely not a feature of this world, but it's very natural and normal in a dream to have these sorts of experiences where identities are swapped or are fluid in a sense. Another feature of the dream world is that causality is not fixed the way it is here. I mean, things happen in sequences which wouldn't make any sense in the physical world. It's as though sorts of different rules apply, that there isn't the same sort of binding of things together in that world as we experience in this world. And another feature also of the dream world is its symbolic nature, that things, you have certain experiences which when you wake up and you think about the dream, you realize, or maybe through the help of a friend or someone who's good at interpreting dreams, that certain objects you saw or experiences you had are symbolic of other things. And so the dream naturally translates from physical objects to meanings. And so there's a transference of meaning between objects and within objects. So all of these are features of the dream world, and we think, well, that's just dreams. That's just your brain is overnight is just reordering and reorganizing itself and healing itself, and the physical explanation. But if we take Baha'u'llah's suggestions seriously and think of the dream as the dream world as real in its own way, then that tells us something about reality that is actually profoundly disturbing. I mean, it's profoundly disturbing because, hold on, our identity is not as solid as we thought. The world around us, everything can be turned upside down, and what ends up being real is something else entirely. So. Yes, and near-death experiences are perhaps the most extreme example of this dream state, the state of having experiences while otherwise unconscious.
uses the same language about the world it's a world wrapped up within
Yes.
as the next world.
Yes,
Says
that's
exactly
right.
the same.
That's right. Yeah, that next world. When we talk about the next world, and that's another. That's also where I think this line of reasoning leads us to, is when we think about the next world, the kingdom of God. The malakut is the word that's often used in the writings. The afterlife. How different is it from the world of sleep? To what extent is one an analogy to the other? To what extent is it actually the soul is traversing those realms in a way? There's a tradition, I believe, in Islam that sleep is referred to as the little death. It's as though we die a little bit every night, and our souls are loosed from our bodies in a way that they become permanently loosed from upon the death of our bodies. But definitely makes us ask, that those kinds of questions. Also, when we think of the next world, can that next world be experienced in this world in a waking state? If we experience it a little bit in the dream state, what about in the waking state? And Abdu'l-Baha seems to confirm that, where he talks about that next world being within this world, that next world being something which something that can be experienced while in this world. All of this has the effect of blurring distinctions that we might have felt before were very hard lines. Not just in the dream world, the distinction between my identity and other identities, but the distinction between this world and the next world becomes blurred. And it all becomes different states of consciousness, which may more or less fluidly move from one state to another. Baha'u'llah in these two valleys in particular, and in the valley that follows, refers to secrets, refers to things that can only be whispered from breast to breast. What is he talking about here? And I want to delve a little bit into this, because there are many places in the Baha'i writings where Baha'u'llah talks about the secret, where he talks about mysteries, hidden things. And what is he referring to? And Baha'u'llah isn't, of course, the first prophet to have done this. This idea of there being hidden truths is a feature of every religion, in a sense. I mean, one could say a commonality of all religions, whether of the East or the West, is that this observed world that we inhabit is just the outer layer, and then there's an invisible layer of things beneath or behind the observed world, which is in some way more real. And so, by nature, the thing that we're aiming at, the thing that it's all about, is a hidden mystery. Just to give one example, but not just a hidden mystery in the sense of it's hidden until you find it, or it's hidden, because I couldn't tell you in words, but hidden in the sense that if I could speak it, but if I spoke it, there would be consequences. And that's the interesting thing about this. And Baha'u'llah refers to this, but he wasn't the first to refer to this kind of a thing. And just to give one example, this is from the Gospel of Thomas. So this is from one of the Gnostic Gospels of Jesus that was discovered in the sands of Egypt in the mid 20th century. I'm talking about the Nag Hammadi Library, and this other Gospel of Jesus was known in fragmentary form prior to its discovery, but now it's available in its entirety. And a few verses from chapter 13 of the Gospel of Thomas read as follows. And Jesus took Thomas and withdrew, and he said 3 words to him. But when Thomas came back to his companions, they asked him, "What did Jesus say to you?" Thomas said to them, "If I tell you one of the words he said to me, you will pick up stones and throw them at me. And fire will come out of the stones and burn you up." So, and Baha'u'llah says something not too different. in the Seven Valleys. This is in paragraph 29 of the Seven Valleys, I believe. No, this is in the Four Valleys. Sorry, paragraph 29 of the Four Valleys. He says, "Whoso comprehendeth the station will assuredly conceal it. And were he to reveal but the faintest trace thereof, they would assuredly hang him from the gallows." What kind of one thinks of spiritual reality as just all good stuff, you know. The more you understand that world, sort of the happier you are, the better off you are. But there seems to be a state or a stage of understanding of things where there's actual danger involved. You know, it's not all fun and games, let's say. It's not all, you know, happiness and love and everything is one. But there's certain things realities that one come to, which are potentially destructive. But let me take a step back and try to address this question a little bit more systematically. When Baha'u'llah talks about secrets, what are the possibilities? So let me enumerate some of the possible kinds of secrets. And let's start with the first, which would be that, well, there really aren't secrets, but when he talks about secrets and mysteries, it's really a euphemism, or it's a way of making people feel like they're in the possession of something that others don't have. It's a way of making people feel special. At best, then, this kind of language would be like, let's say, a motivational narrative that has beneficial social consequences. I'm going to discount that possibility for now, but you know, it's a logical possibility that we're talking about hyperbole, or we're talking about just a way of motivating people by giving them a sense that there's this, you know, like a treasure. It's almost like when it's about the Houris in paradise. You know, you're giving people something to shoot for, but you know that's not really what's there at the end of the journey. So that leaves, I think, a few distinct possibilities, all of which I think there's some truth to. One of the secrets, when Baha'u'llah talks about secrets, particularly in these early works, would be Baha'u'llah's own messianic secret. That is, for a period of time, from around the time of the revelation of the Rashi Amma, which we discovered several weeks ago, until soon after the Kitab-i-Igan, Baha'u'llah was in possession of a messianic secret. So he had a very personal experience of the divine, had experienced his prophetic calling, but kept that a secret for a period of around 10 years. And he alludes to this as a secret. He alludes to this as a hidden mystery in many of his writings, and even in the Seven Valleys, where he talks about things that can't be spoken. You know, some of these, reading with 20/20 hindsight, it seems reasonably clear to us that Baha'u'llah may, in some of those cases, be talking about that secret. But that's a sort of secret which is time sensitive. You know, once that messianic secret is revealed, it's no longer a secret. So there's nothing intrinsically dangerous about it. It's just a matter of there being a time and place for the revelation of, let's say, for the disclosure of certain kinds of information. A second kind of secret would be, and this is a clear message running through the religions of the East and the West, that there is a reality beneath the surface of things, which by its very nature cannot be directly referenced through language. It cannot be expressed in words. It can be alluded to through words. It can be perhaps invoked through the power of words, through the power of poetry, through the power of other human endeavors like arts, music, painting, can also be invoked through processes of nature itself. So there's no danger in talking about it as much as you want, and someone can read about it as much as they want. But until they've actually experienced it, they won't understand it. So there's secrets of that kind, and Baha'u'llah refers to this also in the valley of contentment, and this was in I believe this was the paragraph. Paragraph 64, where he says, "Until thou enter the garden of these inner meanings, thou shalt never taste of the imperishable wine of this valley." You know, just like the drinking of wine and the experience of drunkenness is something which you can read about as much as you want, but unless you've had that experience, you don't really know what the state is like. So Baha'u'llah uses that metaphor of wine to give that idea. So these are secrets then that must be experienced to be understood. And there's no danger of these sorts of secrets being accidentally revealed, because they're only going to be experienced by those who are by definition, really those who are ready to experience them. But there's a third kind of secret, and this is the interesting kind of secret, the dangerous kind of secret. And this is the secret that could be conveyed in words, but shouldn't be talking about here. And it raises the question immediately, well, what are there secret teachings then? Did Baha'u'llah reveal certain tablets that are locked up in the archives that no one can read because it conveys information that no one is supposed to know? And that's not what I'm talking to. That's not what I'm talking about. There are no secret or esoteric teachings in the Baha'i faith in the sense of there being things that Baha'u'llah has written down, which he said, never share this with anyone. It's just, there are, and someone directly asked the House of Justice this question, and they wrote back in a letter. This is dated 8th of February, 1988. They said, the shorter Oxford English Dictionary gives designed for or appropriate to an inner circle of disciples, communicated to or intelligible by the initiated only. And in this sense, there are teachings in the faith. The message of Baha'u'llah is for all human beings, and none of it is for a select circle of initiates. On the other hand, if one is thinking of spiritual truth, the whole revelation is replete with it, and every believer is encouraged, indeed urged, to drink his fill of that water of life. So if there's nothing physically hidden from us, but nevertheless there are secrets which shouldn't be conveyed in words, like Baha'u'llah, like what I read. If were he to reveal but the faintest trace thereof, they would assuredly hang him from the gallows. What are these sorts of secrets? And
I was thinking of a figure of speech.
Maybe it's a figure of speech, but
Like, if the secrets of the delights of the body
yes,
were forced upon a child,
yes,
this would be, the child is not ready for that.
yes.
It would be very destructive.
And this idea is also in the Bible of giving milk to babes and meat to those who are stronger. And I think it's something of that, exactly that's what it is. And there's a few, yes, yeah.
These things have to be done breast to breast, heart to heart.
Right. Maybe they can be whispered from breast to breast to those who where one knows who one's audience is. And this connects us to this problem that Plato had with the written word that we talked about, I think, in one of the opening sessions, that the basic problem with the written word is that once it's written down, you lose control over the distribution of it. And this can be a problem if it gets in the hands of those who, as Plato said, have no business with it. And as long as we think about truths as being essentially agnostic, or truths as being not charged with fundamentally, but facts just being facts, and everything is neutral, then we shouldn't have a problem with that. But if we realize that certain truths of the universe are dangerous in the sense that they can disrupt ways of looking at the world which are appropriate to certain stages of being, then we enter into this territory of, well, what's the milk and what's the meat? Mm-hmm. So Baha'u'llah refers to this kind of a thing in Gleanings. This is selection 89. He says, "How great the multitude of truths which the garment of words can never contain. How vast the number of such verities as no expression can adequately describe, and to which not even the remotest allusions can be made. How manifold the truths which must remain unuttered until the appointed time is come. Even as it hath been said, Not everything that a man knoweth can be disclosed, nor can everything that he can disclose be regarded as timely, nor can every timely utterance be considered as suited to the capacity of those who hear it. Of these truths, some can be disclosed only to the extent of the capacity of the repositories of the light of our knowledge. So if Baha'u'llah here is following that injunction in it's not a matter of, again, of things that he's saying being physically hidden, but what he has to do is put them out in the open. So secrets of this nature, the dangerous truths of this nature, have to be presented out very openly, but perhaps subject to different interpretations, so that those who get it understand what he's saying, and those who aren't ready yet to hear it will simply read the words and understand them differently. That's maybe the trick of the nature of revelation, is it can be read in so many different ways. Baha'u'llah talks about there being 72 meanings behind every verse, and that's one way of looking at this. Abdu'l-Baha also refers to this in selections from the writings of Abdu'l-Baha, selection 214. He says, "Follow thou the way of thy Lord, and say not that which the ears cannot bear to hear, for such speech is like luscious food given to small children. However palatable, rare, and rich the food may be, it cannot be assimilated by the digestive organs of a suckling child. Therefore, unto everyone who hath a right, let his settled measure be given." And then he quotes Baha'u'llah, "Not everything that a man knoweth can be disclosed, nor can everything that he can disclose be regarded as timely, nor can every timely utterance be considered as suited to the capacity of those who hear it. Such is the consummate wisdom to be observed in thy pursuits. Be not oblivious thereof, if thou wishest to be a man of action under all conditions. First diagnose the disease and identify the malady, for such is the perfect method of the skillful physician." So this brings us to back to the analogy of the physician. Baha'u'llah himself describes his own state as being that of the physician, which is different from the state of the scientist or the oracle or the truth teller, the one who just says everything the way it is. The physician will prescribe the remedy in proportion to the sickness. The physician won't necessarily tell the patient that they're dying, for example. The physician won't necessarily reveal the mortality of the patient if the physician believes it wouldn't be in the best interest of the patient's potentially getting better. So there may be facts about the condition of the patient that the physician does not reveal. Those sorts of truths we take for granted in the medical world. Baha'u'llah, in using the analogy of the divine physician, perhaps is suggesting the same kind of thing in the spiritual world, that he's not revealing everything to which he has access. And he takes this point to I think the deadly extreme of this is given in a tablet that this is a provisional translation of a tablet that's published in the original in Safine Erfan, volume 12, and he talks about the grave consequences of this giving meat to babes. He says, "As the law of generosity enacted upon all who are in the heavens and on earth hath been set to the level of their comprehension and rank, know thou that unto the wayfarer who journeys to God and emigrates to him, detaching himself from this transitory abode, seeking to ascend to the eternal home, shall be revealed hidden mysteries and well-guarded truths. The essence of unity and the manifestations of eternal might shall appear to him. And should he arrive at that most exalted station and transcendent home, it behooveth him to be the keeper of the treasures of God's knowledge, and to be the guardian of the pearls of his wisdom. It behooveth the wayfarer to preserve this knowledge that is deposited in the receptacles of enlightened hearts by God, the creator of mankind, to protect it as his very eyes and to conceal it within his breast. For were he to reveal one letter of these secrets to those who are unworthy, he will have perpetrated 3 grievous crimes. The first is betrayal, inasmuch as he hath betrayed God by exposing his mysteries to those unsuited to hear them. The second is injustice, inasmuch as he conferred this station upon the undeserving, and weighted him down with a burden he is unable to bear. Therefore the verdict of oppressor hath been pronounced upon such a wayfarer, and what oppression can be greater than this? The third is murder, because he misled that wretched soul and killed him by killing his faith. For inasmuch as he was unable to comprehend this divine knowledge, his feet slipped from whence he had progressed in the cause of his origin and return. So this is in Safine Arfan, volume 12, pages 16 and 17. So this is really serious stuff. So it's possible to do spiritually destructive damage to people by saying things that they're not ready to hear. And so perhaps I should leave the topic here and not sort of try to delve into it further. Put the book down and walk away slowly, thus far and no farther. But you can't make the sort of a claim that there's this kind of knowledge and expect people not to say, well, what is it? People are curious. This is the sin of Adam, by the way. I mean, this goes back several thousand years. Adam's sin was wanting to know, and his punishment for that knowledge was expulsion from Eden, and the knowledge of his own mortality. So
That was blamed to Eva.
right, but it was yes. That's the extra twist on the story. But it's this knowledge of the tree of good and evil that he wanted to eat. Abdu'l-Baha describes this in Some Answered Questions also about this being the sin of Adam is wanting to know, and we can't help it because that's part of the human station is wanting to know about everything. And don't we have a principle in our faith, the principle of the independent investigation of reality, of harmony of science and religion? Shouldn't religion be reasonable? Are we coming up against, the idea that it's possible to come up against truths which should not be investigated? That there's a wall and that we shouldn't look further. Is something which is hard. It's hard to take lying down. Because we have this desire to know, and perhaps the answers to these questions, perhaps traversing that liminal threshold, will help untie knots, resolve cognitive dissonances that some people feel but other people's don't, and so the resolution of these dissonances isn't a need for everyone, but it's a need for some people, and maybe it can bridge poles of contradiction with hidden meridian lines, and these hidden meridian lines are
It's a warning about your teaching work.
Mm-hmm.
Just be careful.
Yeah, just
Be
go
very
right.
careful.
Sure. Yeah.
Just has returned.
Yes.
Too quick.
Yeah. And maybe also, and I'm also wondering, particularly in these comments, what's the danger to myself? Is there a danger? Is there a spiritual danger to ourselves in delving deeply into these things? Will we reach a point of will we start circling an abyss? There's certainly a lot of possibilities in answering this question, and I will propose that the answer is in the Seven Valleys. That the Seven Valleys actually in open characters the nature of that potentially soul destroying secret, which ultimately, as we progress through the valleys, undoes and unhinges and dissolves certain zero-sum sacred narratives upon which a large fraction of the people of the planet base their faith. Ways of thinking about what is the human reality fundamentally. What is the nature of the soul? What is the nature of God? What is the nature of religion? The basics that are in the Seven Valleys and beyond that throughout Baha'u'llah's writings are dissolved and reconstituted. And if one comes at this dissolution in a state of unreadiness, it can be as though, it's the slaying of sacred cows. There are a lot of sacred cows out there, and Baha'u'llah slays most of them. And we don't want to slay them willy-nilly. Because they have performed an important social function in the past and will continue to do so in the future. Certain comfortable ways of thinking, for instance, that guide human morality, the clear ways of defining what's right and wrong. At a certain level, you realize, well, what's right and wrong is relative to points of view and so forth. But the relativizing of things when you get down into the world and when you get down into questions of morality can have potentially dangerous consequences, even if at some higher metaphysical or abstract level one allows oneself to relativize these truths. There's a pragmatic and practical reason why they need to be stated in more stark terms when we're talking about the world of earth and clay.
The good deeds of the faithful
are the sins of the near ones. Yes. So but viewed from another angle, these sacred cows and are being slain as we speak. The faiths that the kind of faith that has sustained so many people around the world for millennia is dissolving before our eyes with accelerating force in this century, but really beginning with, one could say, the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution, which began to undermine ways of thinking about the universe, which we now regard as superstitious, but which are still very much a part of the thinking of a great majority of people on the planet. And so what we're looking at is it's as though a wildfire is sweeping over the planet. A wildfire which can be described as the fire of irreligion, of chaos, of secularization, of godlessness, and so forth. But that fire, at the same time, is just as the wildfire in the forest has a healing and a restorative function as well. It's tearing through the underbrush of superstition. It's burning up a few tall trees at the same time, but when the fire has done its work, it clears the forest for the growth of new kinds of trees. And so our calling then, our spiritual responsibility is not to be the wildfire. The wildfire is raging. The forces of disintegration are doing their work. Our spiritual responsibility is to be aligned with the forces of integration. When that wildfire has burned itself out, are we seeing that the seedlings of the next generation of lofty trees will germinate? And so all of this, I think, is connected to what I think some of the promise of the Seven Valleys is it helps to offer us, what remains, what are the seedlings of those lofty trees which will germinate after the destruction which is wrought by this wave of secularization which is sweeping the world. Because we can't go back to the way things were. When it's all said and done, when we talk about a rebirth of spirituality, when we talk about the recognition of the oneness of the human race, and when we talk about the rebirth of faith in the world, it can't be this faith in the same terms that it was defined in the past. because we're no longer children. You know, we're passing through the stages of adolescence, and the view of the adult cannot be the same as the view of the child. What Baha'u'llah is offering us, and I think more in the later valleys, is a view of how we can look at the universe, which is postmodern in a sense. You know, it's a way of inhabiting the world spiritually, which is that which survives the wildfire. You know, it's the seedlings of the lofty trees which will germinate after those fires burn themselves out. And I think what Baha'u'llah is suggesting in these later valleys, and some of what's so challenging about it, is he's helping us to answer the question that we come to once we pass through the valley of unity. We start asking this question: well, what if my consciousness, what if my soul, my individuality is not like elementary atoms of reality that persist, you know, like protons and electrons that have essentially infinite lifetimes and stable identities. You know, what if my consciousness is not this stable thing just like protons and electrons, but what if it's more like a ray of light? You know, rays of light have a different sort of reality. There's also conservation of energy, you know, which applies to rays of light. You know, they don't just disappear. But the persistence of that kind of energy is different from the persistence of energy in the physical form. And if we think of our spiritual realities as being more like light, you know, luminous beings are we, more like light than matter, then we have both a promise of a way of looking at spirituality but also something which is deeply challenging to the ways that we are used to thinking about our ultimate nature. You know, what if the individual self really is an illusion? You know, this is where we're heading towards in the last valley, in the valley of true poverty and absolute nothingness. This is though we're circling the edge of an abyss. You know, and into that abyss is darkness and annihilation. I mean, actual annihilation, in which the idea of the self is completely burned away, and it's the darkest of nights, you know, where souls lose their way, where faith is shaken, where this is beyond bewilderment into the state of nothingness. But this is also where the knots become untied. This is also there is the possibility of a rebirth into something new, because the state of annihilation is not the final state. You know, on the other side of annihilation, on the other side of fana is bara. On the other side of annihilation is and a return to the world. In this sense, the seven valleys is the hero's journey. You know, we've heard Joseph Campbell talk about this. It inspired Star Wars. You know, the idea that there's an initial state, Baha'u'llah called the plane of heedlessness. You know, you set out on the valley of search. You set out on the hero's journey. You depart into the wilderness. You experience conflict. You experience, transformation, a resolution of conflict, and you return in the end. It's out on that journey that the transformation takes place. There's separation, purification, and then marriage or reunion. This is also the secret of the alchemical process that Baha'u'llah was writing about extensively during the time that he was writing about the seven valleys. So we're talking about the nature of the spiritual journey being a passage into out of the comfort zones that we began in, but it's in that region of discomfort, and it's in that passage into the unknown, into the darkness of fana, into the darkness of annihilation, that the transformation takes place. And when we return home in the end, when the hero's journey is completed, when we pass out of the state of fana into the state of bara, the self is recovered, but it's not the self that was there before. You know, it's the reborn self that has a things. And this, I think, brings us back to what I see as one of the major points of the seven valleys, that we are all on the hero's journey at different stages. Well, I mean, perhaps most of us haven't yet even set out on the hero's journey. If Baha'u'llah refers to the plane of heedlessness as prior to the plane of search, how many of us are actually just in that plane of heedlessness? But those of us who are on the hero's journey are in different stages, and at each of these stages of understanding, we think we know. At each of these stages, we think we've got it, because we're farther along than we were before. We have insights that we didn't have before, and we think that that's it. We think that we think we understand, but none of us really know, and none of us have reached the end of the journey. And so you have the inevitability of conflict, because everyone is so equally convinced that they know when they don't know. And there's no solution to this. It's a feature of the human condition that we're all on different stages of this journey. And the Seven Valleys presents this so beautifully. And it also presents so beautifully in the next tablet, which we'll be looking at either next week or the week afterwards, the solution to it, which is not put everyone in the same valley. The spiritual solution is not everyone retreat to the same comfortable corner of looking at the universe. The solution is be kind to each other. Be gentle to each other. Recognize that we're all in different states, and that the sins of the righteous are the good deeds of the righteous are the sins of the near ones. That that those in this valley see those in the other valley as just don't get it. And vice versa. Recognize that that's the way it is, and just be kind to each other. That's kind of it's a simple solution, but it's a non-dogmatic solution, and it invites us into a way of looking at the religious experience, and a way of looking at membership in a religion as dogma-free as possible. We're talking about a post-ideological landscape in which one's faith is not defined by adherence to a set of axioms, but rather to participation in a community life which is celebrating of the diversity of spiritual viewpoints within it. In this, it has a sort of traces of a kind of a postmodern flavor. I mean, it's something that's on the other side of modernity. It's not a retreat to earlier medieval ways of looking at religiosity, but first of all, we have to pass into the abyss, and that's for the next session when we talk about the valley of true poverty and absolute nothingness.